Let's start with something most people don't expect. You think the moment of power is when you finally confront them. When you say, I know what you're doing. When you lay out the manipulation like evidence in a courtroom. But that's not actually the moment they know you know. They know long before that. Narcissistic personalities are highly attuned to shifts in control, not empathy, not emotional depth, control. They track it constantly. It's almost instinctive. So when something changes in you, even slightly, they feel it. Maybe you stopped defending yourself in every argument. Maybe you didn't rush to fix the tension. Maybe you didn't send that long text explaining your feelings. Maybe you just said, okay, and went quiet. That quiet is loud. In the past, you might have scrambled to smooth things over. You may have over-explained, apologized for things you didn't do, tried to help them understand. That energy, that anxious, emotional effort was a form of supply. It told them you were still invested, still trying, still hooked. And then something shifts. You begin to observe instead of react. You pause before responding. You don't take the bait when they provoke you. Your voice is calmer. Your eyes are clearer. There's less urgency in you. They notice. Narcissists are experts at reading micro changes in behavior because their sense of control depends on it. They may not understand emotional intimacy, but they absolutely understand power dynamics. When you start detaching, your body language changes, your tone changes, even your breathing changes. You are no longer leaning in, you are subtly pulling back. You may not even realize you're doing it. Sometimes awareness starts quietly. You begin researching, you start recognizing patterns, you see the gaslighting, you identify the blame shifting, you catch the contradictions, and without announcing anything, your nervous system begins to settle because confusion is being replaced with clarity. That internal clarity radiates outward. And here's the thing, narcissistic individuals are deeply threatened by emotional independence. The moment you stop orbiting around them emotionally, they feel destabilized because control thrives on reaction. If they say something cutting and you don't crumble, that's information. If they twist a story and you calmly say, that's not what happened, without escalating, that's information. If you no longer chase them after they withdraw, that's information. They start asking themselves, what changed? You may think you're being subtle, you may think you're hiding your awareness, but detachment has a different energy than confusion. Confusion is frantic, detachment is steady, and steady is unsettling to someone who depends on chaos to maintain dominance. Sometimes they'll test it. They'll provoke you slightly just to see if the old reaction is still there. A passive-aggressive comment, a subtle dig, a comparison. They're checking the temperature. And when the emotional spike doesn't happen the way it used to, they know something is different. This is why you might notice a sudden shift in their behavior right when you start feeling stronger. They may become unusually attentive, or unusually irritable, or suddenly suspicious. That's not random. That's them sensing the loss of leverage. Because the truth is, narcissistic dynamics are less about love and more about regulation. They regulate their self-worth through your reactions. When you stop reacting predictably, they lose a stabilizing force. And here's what's powerful. You don't have to say a single word about what you've realized. You don't have to confront them with a psychological label. You don't have to declare, I see through you. Your calm does that for you. When you stop trying to convince someone who is committed to misunderstanding you, your nervous system shifts. When you stop performing for approval, your posture shifts. When you stop fighting for validation, your tone shifts, and they feel that shift like a tremor under their feet. Because now you are not participating in the old dance. You're stepping back and watching it. And the moment you step back, the illusion weakens. The manipulation loses friction. The control starts to slip. That's when they know. Not because you expose them, but because you no longer need them to validate your reality. And that is the moment the power dynamic begins to change. When your silence becomes stronger than their strategy, they know you see them clearly. Now, once that internal shift begins, once your energy changes, something else starts to happen. And this is where the dynamic really begins to unravel. You stop feeding the supply. Let's talk about that word for a moment, supply. It sounds clinical, but what it really means is attention, validation, admiration, emotional reaction. Narcissistic personalities depend on it the way some people depend on oxygen. It regulates them. It stabilizes their fragile sense of self. And most of the time, you don't even realize how much you've been providing it. Every time you defend yourself for hours trying to clear up a lie, that's supply. Every time you cry and plead for them to understand your perspective, that's supply. Every time you try to prove your loyalty, your love, your goodness, that's supply. Even your anger can be supply. Because what matters most isn't whether the attention is positive or negative. What matters is that it's focused on them. In the earlier stages, you might have believed that if you just explained yourself better, they would finally see you. If you just stayed calm enough, loving enough, patient enough, they would stop attacking or distorting reality. But over time, something clicks. You realize you're exhausting yourself trying to win a game that was never designed to be fair, and slowly, sometimes quietly, you stop playing. You don't jump into every argument. You don't correct every false accusation. You don't respond to every jab. You choose your energy more carefully, and that's when they feel it. Because when the supply starts to thin out, there's a kind of emotional withdrawal that happens on their end. Think about it. If someone is used to getting a big emotional reaction every time they press a certain button, and suddenly the button doesn't work anymore, they don't just shrug, they press it harder, they press it repeatedly. They start experimenting with other buttons. This is why when you stop feeding the supply, you may initially see escalation. They might provoke you more intensely. They may accuse you of being cold, distant, selfish. They may say you've changed. And in a way you have. You've changed from reactive to regulated. And regulation is incredibly threatening to someone who thrives on emotional chaos. When you no longer feel the urgent need to defend your character, something powerful happens. You stop performing. You stop auditioning for basic respect. You stop trying to convince someone of your worth. That withdrawal of effort, that quiet refusal to overfunction, creates a vacuum. And narcissistic personalities feel vacuums immediately. They may try to pull you back in with criticism. If that doesn't work, they might switch to charm. If that doesn't work, they might play the victim. Each tactic is designed to see if you'll re-engage at the same intensity as before. But when you respond with neutrality, not hostility, not cruelty, just steadiness, the dynamic shifts. It's not about becoming emotionally numb, it's about becoming emotionally disciplined. Instead of long emotional debates, you offer brief responses. Instead of defending every distortion, you calmly state, "That's not accurate," and move on. Instead of trying to repair every rupture, you allow silence to exist. And silence is powerful because silence says, "I am no longer participating in this cycle." What's important to understand is that when you stop feeding the supply, you're not being manipulative. You're not playing games. You're conserving your energy. You're protecting your mental clarity. You're stepping out of a loop that was designed to keep you spinning. And when that loop breaks, the narcissistic individual feels destabilized. Not because they suddenly understand the harm they've caused, but because the emotional economy has shifted. The constant influx of reassurance, reaction, and validation has slowed down, and that forces them to confront something they avoid at all costs: emptiness. Without your emotional labor, without your constant attempts to smooth things over, they are left alone with themselves, and that's uncomfortable. And so they may intensify their efforts to pull you back in. But here's the key. Consistency matters. If you stop feeding the supply one day and go back to over-explaining the next, the cycle resets. The real shift happens when your boundaries are quiet, steady, and sustained. You don't announce that you're withdrawing supply. You simply stop handing it over. And that's when they know. They know not because you accused them, not because you labeled them, but because the emotional fuel they relied on is no longer flowing the same way, when your attention is no longer automatic, when your reactions are no longer predictable, when your validation is no longer guaranteed, the power dynamic changes. And the moment they realize they can't feed off your energy the way they used to, they understand something profound has shifted. When you stop fueling the fire, the flames reveal themselves. And once you stop feeding the supply, something even more destabilizing happens for them. Their manipulation stops working. Now, this is where things get very interesting, because narcissistic manipulation is rarely random. It's patterned, it's rehearsed, it's refined over years. Gaslighting, guilt tripping, blame shifting, playing the victim, silent treatment, triangulation. These aren't accidental behaviors. They are strategies designed to create confusion and regain control. And for a long time, they worked. Gaslighting worked because you doubted yourself. You found yourself thinking, maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I overreacted. That self-doubt kept you hooked. It kept you coming back for clarification. It kept you trying to reconcile two realities, yours and theirs. But then something shifts. You start documenting things. You start noticing contradictions. You replay conversations and realize your memory is intact. You talk to someone outside the dynamic and hear, that's not okay. And slowly, the fog begins to lift. The next time they say, I never said that, instead of spiraling internally, you think, yes, you did. And maybe you don't even argue about it. You just hold your ground internally. That's a massive shift, because gaslighting depends on participation. It depends on you engaging in the debate about reality. When you stop debating reality, when you stop trying to convince someone of what clearly happened, the tactic weakens. The same thing happens with guilt tripping. In the past, when they said, after everything I've done for you, you might have felt immediate shame. You might have rushed to reassure them. But once you see the pattern, you recognize it as emotional leverage. And instead of scrambling to prove your gratitude, you pause. You respond with something neutral, or you don't respond at all. Blame shifting loses its power too. When they accuse you of causing the very problem they created, you used to feel compelled to defend yourself. Now you might simply say, I disagree, and leave it there. No long explanation, no emotional unraveling, just calm disagreement. And that calm is incredibly disruptive to someone who thrives on destabilizing you. Here's the thing. Manipulation is effective when it produces a predictable emotional reaction: confusion, fear, shame, desperation. Once those reactions stop coming automatically, the manipulator feels exposed. You'll often see a flicker of something in those moments: irritation, frustration, sometimes even panic, because they can sense that the script isn't landing the way it used to. And when the script fails, they have to improvise. They might intensify the gaslighting. You're imagining things. They might escalate the guilt. You've become so cold. They might attempt to reassert dominance through anger, or they might pivot to charm. But underneath all of it is one realization: you're not responding the way you used to. And that tells them you see the pattern. This doesn't mean you're confrontational. It doesn't mean you're aggressive. In fact, often it's the opposite. You become quieter, more observant, less reactive. Your responses become shorter, your energy becomes steadier, and steadiness is the enemy of manipulation. Because manipulation thrives in emotional storms. It needs heightened intensity to blur lines and distort reality. When you remain grounded, the distortion becomes obvious, even to them. They may accuse you of being detached. They may say you don't care anymore. They may claim you've changed. And again, in some ways you have. You've changed from someone trying to solve the puzzle to someone who understands there was never a puzzle to solve. There was a pattern. And once you recognize the pattern, you stop personalizing it. You stop thinking, what's wrong with me? And start thinking, this is what they do. That cognitive shift is powerful. It removes the emotional hook. And here's why that matters so much. When manipulation stops working, the narcissistic individual is forced into a position they hate: lack of control. They can't easily pull you into confusion. They can't easily trigger shame. They can't easily rewrite reality. They may not say it out loud. They may never admit it, but they know. They know because their usual tools no longer create the same chaos in you. And when the chaos stops, the control starts slipping. When their tactics no longer shake your sense of reality, they understand something fundamental has changed. The moment you stop questioning your sanity, they realize you found your clarity. And once they realize the manipulation isn't landing the way it used to, once they feel the shift in your energy and the supply thinning out, you'll often see something very telling. They escalate or they switch tactics. This is one of the clearest signs that they know you know, because when their usual strategies stop working, they don't suddenly become self-reflective. They don't sit down and think, yeah, maybe I should grow, maybe I should take accountability. That's not the reflex. The reflex is control restoration. So they try something stronger. Escalation can look like anger that feels disproportionate. Small disagreements suddenly turn into explosive arguments. You might hear harsher criticism, more cutting remarks, more aggressive blame. It can feel like they're trying to bulldoze over your new steadiness. Why? Because intensity used to work. If they could overwhelm you emotionally, you'd go back into defense mode. You'd scramble to fix things. You'd start explaining, apologizing, negotiating. Escalation is an attempt to shock your nervous system back into the old pattern. And when that doesn't work, they may pivot. Suddenly, they're kind again, attentive, affectionate. They may apologize, but in a way that still avoids true accountability. They might say, I just don't want to lose you. Or we used to be so good. What happened to us? It can feel confusing, especially if you've been longing for that softer version of them. But here's what's important to understand. Timing matters. If the kindness only appears after you've pulled back, if the affection resurfaces only when you stop reacting, that's not transformation. That's strategy. This is what I often call love bombing 2.0. It's not the grand, over-the-top seduction from the beginning. It's subtler. It's calibrated. Just enough warmth to see if you'll reattach emotionally. Just enough vulnerability to see if you'll lower your guard. Because what they're really doing is testing the perimeter of your new boundaries. They're asking, without asking, are you really done playing the old role? Or can I still pull you back in? This is why consistency is so important. If you stay steady during escalation, not matching the anger, not defending endlessly, so they take note. If you stay steady during sudden affection, not collapsing back into overinvestment, they take note of that too. Either way, they are gathering data. And here's the deeper truth. Escalation and charm are two sides of the same coin. Both are attempts to regain emotional leverage. One uses fear, the other uses hope. If fear doesn't work, they try hope. If hope doesn't work, they may go back to fear. It's a cycle of experimentation. And when you see that pattern clearly, something powerful happens. You stop interpreting their behavior as random mood swings. You stop thinking, maybe this time it's real. Instead, you start recognizing the sequence. Distance, reaction attempt, tactic shift. That recognition removes the mystique. You're no longer mesmerized by the intensity or softened by the charm. You're observing the strategy. And observation changes everything. You might notice they become increasingly frustrated when neither escalation nor affection produces the old emotional response. That frustration can leak out in subtle ways: sarcasm, dismissiveness, sudden coldness. It's the discomfort of someone who realizes their usual control mechanisms aren't as effective. Because at its core, this is about control, not connection. If it were about connection, your calm clarity would be welcomed. Your boundaries would be respected. Your emotional regulation would be seen as maturity. But when it's about control, your steadiness feels like defiance. So they push harder or they pull sweeter. And in both cases, the message underneath is the same. They sense the shift. This is the phase where many people get pulled back in. Not because they're weak, but because intermittent reinforcement is powerful. A little kindness after a lot of chaos can feel intoxicating. It can reignite hope. But awareness means asking one simple question. Is this consistent change or is this reactive adjustment? Consistent change is steady over time. even when you're not pulling away. Reactive adjustment appears only when they sense they're losing influence. When you start to see that difference, you stop being swayed by temporary improvements or intimidated by temporary explosions. You stay grounded. And that grounded presence sends a very clear signal. They know the old script is failing. They know the emotional shortcuts aren't working. They know you're not responding automatically anymore. And that realization unsettles them more than any confrontation ever could. When escalation and charm both fall flat, they understand something has shifted in you that they can no longer easily control. And when their tactics start changing, it's because they know the game they were playing has been seen. And after the escalation doesn't quite land the way it used to, after the charm feels less effective, something more subtle begins to happen. They start testing you. Now, this phase can be incredibly confusing if you don't recognize it for what it is, because it doesn't always look dramatic. It doesn't always look explosive. Sometimes it looks almost casual. A small comment about your tone, a reference to an old mistake you made years ago, a subtle comparison to someone else, a quiet, "You've changed." It can feel like they're just observing, but they're not observing. They're probing. Testing is about data collection. They're trying to figure out whether your clarity is temporary or permanent, whether your boundaries are emotional or structural, whether you've had a passing moment of strength or a true shift in awareness. So they press lightly at first. They might resurrect an old argument to see if you'll jump in and defend yourself for the 100th time. They might misrepresent something small and watch your face carefully. They might withhold affection briefly to see if you chase. And what they're looking for is familiar reactivity, because reactivity equals access. If you snap back defensively, they learn the old hooks are still there. If you over-explain again, they learn you're still seeking validation. If you panic at emotional distance, they learn the abandonment lever still works. But if you don't, that's when the testing becomes more deliberate. You might notice slightly sharper remarks, a sarcastic tone, a deliberate boundary push. Maybe they show up late when punctuality matters to you. Maybe they interrupt you more in front of others. These aren't random acts. They are calibrated disruptions. They're trying to see how solid your internal foundation really is. And here's the part that's important. Testing often comes wrapped in plausible deniability. If you call it out, they can say, "You're overreacting. It was just a joke. You're too sensitive." That way, they maintain control of the narrative while still gathering information about your emotional threshold. But once you understand that testing is happening, you stop personalizing it. You stop thinking, "Why are they being like this?" and start recognizing they're measuring my boundaries. And that recognition changes how you respond. Instead of reacting emotionally, you respond proportionally, calmly, briefly, sometimes with no response at all. If they bring up an old mistake, you might say, "We've already discussed that," and disengage. If they push a boundary, you restate it without heat. If they try to provoke you in public, you don't perform for the audience. And the key here is consistency. One calm response doesn't convince them. Two doesn't either. But over time, when every probe meets the same steady boundary, something becomes undeniable. The dynamic has shifted. They may even increase the frequency of tests at first. Think of it like someone jiggling a locked door handle repeatedly, hoping it will suddenly open. They don't immediately accept that access has changed. But eventually, patterns speak louder than words. They realize you're not reacting the way you used to. You're not chasing. You're not spiraling. You're not collapsing into self-doubt. And that's when the tone may subtly change again. Sometimes testing morphs into subtle resentment, a quiet coldness, a sense that they feel you slipping beyond their reach. Because at the heart of it, testing isn't about curiosity. It's about control confirmation. They're asking, "Can I still move you emotionally on command?" And when the answer becomes consistently no, something fundamental shifts. This is also the phase where you might feel tempted to prove something, to show them how strong you are, to demonstrate your awareness. But the real power isn't in performing your growth, it's in living it quietly. You don't need to declare that you see the pattern. Your regulated nervous system does that for you. Your shortened responses do that for you. Your refusal to rehash old distortions does that for you. Testing loses its effectiveness when there's no emotional volatility to measure. And here's something subtle but profound. When they stop testing as intensely, it's not because they've suddenly grown comfortable with your boundaries. It's because they've gathered enough data to understand the old access points are closed. That realization may not bring peace immediately. Sometimes it brings distance, sometimes it brings tension, but it also brings clarity because now the dynamic isn't hidden behind confusion. You can see the attempts, you can see the probes, you can see the strategy, and when you can see the strategy, you are no longer inside it. When their tests no longer trigger you, they understand something they can't easily undo. You are no longer emotionally programmable. And after all the testing, after the escalation, after the charm, after the subtle probes and strategic jabs, we arrive at the deepest layer of this dynamic. What truly unsettles them is not the possibility of losing you. It's the possibility of losing control of the narrative. Because for a narcissistic personality, the narrative is everything. It's not just about what happened. It's about how what happened is framed. Who is the victim? Who is the hero? Who is too sensitive? Who is difficult? Who is unstable? The story must protect their image at all costs. And for a long time, you may have unknowingly helped maintain that story. You explained their behavior to friends. You minimized the harm. You blamed stress, childhood wounds, work pressure. You absorbed the distortion quietly. In doing so, you protected the narrative. But when you wake up, when you truly see the pattern, something shifts internally. You stop rewriting reality to make them comfortable. You stop carrying the emotional labor of maintaining their image. You don't necessarily go public. You don't necessarily expose them dramatically, but you stop participating in the illusion. And that is deeply threatening because now you are no longer an emotional participant in the story. You are an observer of it. When you calmly set boundaries without theatrics, when you decline to argue about facts that are clear, when you refuse to accept blame that isn't yours, when you speak plainly without rage, without drama, you destabilize the narrative, not with volume, with clarity. And clarity is dangerous to someone who relies on distortion. They may begin to sense that you could speak the truth if you chose to. They may worry that others might start seeing what you see. They may subtly attempt to discredit you preemptively, suggesting you're stressed, overwhelmed, overly emotional. That's narrative protection at work. Because what they fear most isn't abandonment, it's exposure. Exposure doesn't always mean public humiliation. It can simply mean that you are no longer confused. You are no longer doubting yourself. You are no longer internalizing their projections. You see it, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. That awareness changes how you carry yourself. You don't flinch at accusations the way you used to. You don't crumble under criticism that feels misplaced. You don't scramble to fix their moods. You let discomfort exist without rushing to soothe it. That quiet confidence communicates something powerful. I know what's happening here. And when they sense that knowing, they feel a loss of control that goes deeper than any argument. Because control of you was never just about behavior, it was about perception. As long as you questioned yourself, they were safe. As long as you defended yourself frantically, they were safe. As long as you tried to win their approval, they were safe. But when you move from confusion to comprehension, from reaction to observation, from performance to presence, the safety net tears. They may try to reassert the narrative one more time. They may attempt to paint you as the problem. They may seek allies. They may intensify charm with others to reinforce their image. But something fundamental has shifted. You are no longer trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you. You are no longer negotiating your reality. You are no longer shrinking yourself to keep the peace. And that is the moment the dynamic truly changes.